Great evening. Today marks the day where all over the nation awareness is being brought forth as we focus on the inequalities that drive HIV and AIDS. The Jackson, Mississippi Alumnae chapter and the Delta Pi chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, along with the men of Epsilon Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, would like to empower the community with an open dialogue on the forgotten fear, a discussion around HIV/AIDS and Black women. As we prepare to hear from our panelists, Dr. Monger, Mrs. Evans, Dr. O'Reilly, Ms. Rucker, I encourage you to take a moment and shake off any tiredness that you may have. Relax, enjoy, and most of all, open your minds to receive the valuable information that will be shared this evening. I can assure you, something good is about to happen. And yes, something good is most certainly in store. Enjoy the program.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, rather. It's after 6. Thank you all so much for having us today. We are excited about this interactive discussion around HIV, and certainly still a very relevant presentation where we are not having this discussion enough. Here, 40 years into the epidemic, this is not a conversation we're having enough, specifically in the African-American community. So before we go into the panelist piece, as an educator, as a 20-year vet, as a health educator, I would do a disservice if I didn't give you all some stats and some numbers. So I want to just take a few moments, do a few stats, and then we're going to go into our panel discussion. All right, so here we are talking about the forgotten few. Choosing the title Forgotten Few is really because it's almost as if we've forgotten that HIV is still a very relevant issue. It's still a very relevant issue, specifically in the South and among African Americans. This year marks our 40th year with HIV. And 2019, the president at the time developed the Ending the Epidemic strategy. That strategy was intended to actually eliminate HIV by 2030. I'll talk a little bit about it, but 40 years into this epidemic, the goal around ending the epidemic was to reduce the new infections of HIV by 75% in 5 years. And then by 2030, by 90%. Now, I'll just tell you, with the onset of COVID, that has thrown that schedule off for so many different reasons, right? People did not, for a whole year, many people didn't have access to healthcare services. And I'll just be honest with you, people were making themselves feel better by engaging in sex. And that sex wasn't always safe. It wasn't always protected. And they didn't always have access to HIV testing. So are we still seeking to end the epidemic? Absolutely. We understand that you can only do that by doing 4 things: diagnosing early, and you can only diagnose if you're getting tested, by getting treatment as soon as you know, and by prevention and to respond. So when we see that there's issues, when we see what we call in the business a cluster, where a number of people are testing positive for HIV relatively rapidly in a small area, that we respond to those areas with prevention as well as treatment options. HIV for the South has really become like a fast-moving storm, right? When you think about it, you think about how a storm brews and moving fast. In 2019, the South actually accounted for more than 50% of the new HIV diagnosis. So yeah, the Bible Belt. So nearly 44% of those diagnoses were in the deep South, which is where we're located: Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Texas. And I tell people all the time, Atlanta is not the South. It is not always a representation, as well as New Orleans. You have to consider the rural nature of the South, and the fact that many of us, many Southern states did not expand access to Medicaid. So this storm has continued to brew. Now, I want to make sure that you know that no place other than the South, I don't think, focuses on the Bible the way we do in the South, right? We live and love by the Bible, but that same Bible we follow often fuels the stigma that prevents many from acquiring and seeking services around HIV. Given a little historical content, many of us, and I'm speaking in African Americans, did not know HIV even existed until Magic Johnson announced his status some years ago. I believe it was like around 90, 91, he announced his status. And what's unfortunate is that was 10 years into the HIV epidemic before African Americans even started having the conversation. Now, a couple of years later, the picture you see here is Ray Lewis Thornton. She was actually the first African American woman to be featured on the cover of Essence, who talked about being a person living with AIDS, right? So here we are, 1994, before African American women were even targeted and talked to about this issue around HIV. So when I'm calling it the forgotten few, at one point we were having this discussion on a pretty regular basis, but somewhere along the way we've gotten away from that. But mind you, again, 13 years in the epidemic before Black women were even introduced into the conversation. So where does that leave us when we start to talk about stats and where we are as a group, as a race of people? I'm going to run down some numbers really quick to you all. And about still in 2018, still about 37 million people living with HIV. Approximately 1 in 5 people are infected with HIV and unaware of their status. And I'll be honest with you, in Mississippi, those numbers aren't much different. We're about 1 in 7 in the state of Mississippi, people who are living with HIV but unaware of their infection. Nationally, the United States recorded about 37,000 new infections in 2018. 69% of those cases were among same-gender loving men, also known as gay or bisexual men, while the other 24% were among heterosexuals. That does not, I'm really careful when I'm giving those stats because I don't want to give the assumption that this is not an issue that I have to worry about if I'm a heterosexual woman or if I'm a heterosexual man. Those are still really high numbers, really high numbers. I want to go ahead and go to age group is important, 25 to 34, young people, right? Think about it, 25 years old, 26 years old being diagnosed with HIV. This is a lifelong diagnosis. It's a lifelong diagnosis. If you take a look at the screen here, you will see that although the highest number was among 25 to 34-year-olds, 13 to 24-year-olds were the next highest group. So we're talking about teenagers. We're talking about 15, 16, 17 years old being impacted with a disease that there's no cure for, that there is no cure for. Speaking of race, African Americans still to this day lead in the group of people being diagnosed with HIV. You can see 42% of those diagnosed in 2019 in the United States were African Americans. Again, forgotten few, not just Black women, but African Americans as a whole. We've been forgotten about when it comes to this epidemic. Now I'm gonna skip through because I wanna make sure that we have enough time for the panel. But when we start to think about the states, remember I said that it was like a fast brewing storm in the South. You can see what the numbers look like specifically around the South. When you compare the South to the West, the Midwest, the Northeast, and even those independent areas, we're at 15.2. So what does that number mean? That's that per 100,000, the South has the highest case rates of HIV. Now, I don't know if this is a surprise to anyone, and we've been talking about it, but people still think, oh, well, that problem has probably gone and we don't have to worry about that anymore. It's still very much a concern. Specifically, you can see where Mississippi ranks. If you'll see that 19.2, so that's where we are in Mississippi. 19.2, meaning our rates are higher than Alabama, our rates are higher than Tennessee, Arkansas. They're up there when you start to think about Georgia, Florida, Louisiana. Our rates are higher than Texas. And we know that Texas has a much larger population in general, right, than we have in Mississippi. 2.9 million people roughly in the state of Mississippi. And that was prior to COVID. So how many people are now in this state, but we're still seeing these high case rates of HIV? There was a study done a couple of years ago by CDC ranking where Mississippians would lie as it relates to HIV. And we found that 1 in 85 Mississippians would acquire HIV in their lifetime. 1 in 85. That is a lot of people. A lot of people. 1 in 85, regardless of risk, regardless of who you're sleeping with, regardless of any of that. 1 in 85. Now, 2019, we've continued and consistently had 400 plus people a year being diagnosed with HIV. But what's more astounding is the fact that 363 of those 480 people that were diagnosed in 2019 were African-American. 289 were men, 74 were women. You think to yourself, well, 74 is not a high number for women. Well, you think constantly we have almost 100 women diagnosed each year. And think about where we are as women, right? We are in many cases the foundation to a family. We know, y'all know if mama go down, the whole house gone down, right? Kids, the husband, the significant other, the job. So 74 women being diagnosed with HIV is a lot of women being diagnosed with HIV. It put Mississippi where we still ranked 5th highest HIV diagnosis rates in 2019. 5th highest. And Jackson had the 7th highest diagnosis rate. A little bit better. We were at number 4, right? We were number 4, Jackson, and we've gotten a little better to now we're 7th, but we got to get out of the top 10. Our population is just not large enough to be carrying a 7th highest diagnosis rate of HIV in the country. The numbers are just crazy. Want to mention before we roll in that prevention is possible. If you have not heard about a medication called PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, it is a medication that actually will prevent a person from acquiring HIV if they come in contact with a person who is HIV positive. So if you have unprotected sex with someone who's HIV positive, if you're on PrEP, it greatly reduces the chances that you'll acquire HIV. Greatly reduces the chances. Before we even go into the medication, I want to make sure that you all know that Truvada is the only, and this is the name brand, but Truvada is the only medication that has been approved for use in women. Right now, Descovy has not been approved for use in women. So if you are considering PrEP as an option, make sure you're asking your provider about Truvada, not Descovy. It has not been scientifically proven to be effective in women. The medication is an HIV medication. They are generally taken as long as you feel like you need it, right? Once a day, each day, as long as you feel like you're in a situation or relationship where you're uncertain of your partner's risk, or even if your partner may have decided to step out in the past, you may be a good candidate for PrEP. Just to go in to make sure you understand the numbers and the protection of the medication, research has found is actually more than 90%. It's about a 97, 98% effective when we start to talk about reducing the risk around HIV. So this is huge when we start to talk about ending the epidemic, specifically in the South, we have the tools. We got to get out of our own way, which is what we're going to be doing tonight. So let's talk HIV. I'm going to take a moment and let my panelists introduce themselves. I'll start with Ms. Rymsky. Ms. Rymsky, if you want to just take a moment and tell everyone who you are and what's going on. Let's start with you, Ms. Rymsky.
Well, hello, everyone. I am so honored to be among all the Delta women tonight. I'm Rymsky Evans from Jackson, Mississippi. And tonight, of course, I am a panelist, and I'm a Black woman living with HIV. And so I am so elated to be able to share my testimony, to inform and educate women and also men tonight. And I'm looking forward to the great conversation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Amani.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Amani Rucker. I'm here representing the Delta Pi chapter. I am the International Awareness and Involvement Committee Chair, and I'm also a biology major, a senior here at Jackson State University. Also happy to be here.
Dr. O'Reilly.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm Dr. Kesha O'Reilly. I'm actually a medical scientist for Gilead, and I'm excited to be here tonight with the Delta ladies. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, you all, let's get right into this discussion, right? So I gave a few stats, talked a little bit about where we are nationally when it comes to HIV. But I want to ask from each one of you all, why has the HIV burden remained so heavy in the South? And I'm gonna start with I'm gonna do Ms. Rucker first, and then Ms. Rymsky, and then Kesha, you can finish it up. Dr. O'Reilly, you can finish it up with the stats and the numbers and the corporate response. So Ms. Rucker, why have these numbers remained so high in the South?
Growing up in Jackson in Mississippi, I definitely believe in the Bible Belt and everything you said about us being conservative, and really just people not thinking that it can happen to them, and just trusting their partners, not really trusting science more than their religion and things like that. So
yeah. So I heard religion, I heard not trusting science. We've talked a lot about not trusting science lately, right?
Right.
Been a lot of conversation around not trusting science. So Ms. Evans, what do you think? And thank you for sharing. Let me say this first. Thank you for being open and honest with us about your status. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the future, but why do you think the burden has been so heavy?
Well, what I think why the burden has been so heavy is because, the greatest thing about people living with HIV is stigma. A lot of people in fear, not wanting to know, the truth, so they don't get tested. And so I think that is one of the reasons why it has been a burden.
Stigma. We're going to talk about stigma in just a few minutes. Dr. O'Reilly, what do you think?
Well, first and foremost, I'm a Black woman, so I'm going to always say racism.
Yes.
Institutional racism. You guys have already mentioned about the Bible Belt, but again, that is some people can also look at that as oppression, but also being able to appreciate when HIV was first diagnosed, it was thought about as only a gay disease, and then being able to appreciate as we've evolved, understanding that really HIV from a perspective of disproportionality, being able to appreciate that there are some aspects in terms of socioeconomic issues around individuals having access to healthcare, being able to get testing just right off the bat, along with being able to appreciate that as Black people, the aspect of sexuality has been oppressed. So with all of that wrapped in a nice bow around I love the Lord and he heard my cry. You have that where we don't do a very good job in terms of embracing sexuality and having conversations on good quality sex that can be done in a safe manner.
So these were not on my list, but this you just brought up two things that I think we don't talk enough about: racism and sexism. Specifically because as Black women, right, we got the double layer.
Yep.
Again, is why we titled it The Forgotten Few, because we're both impacted by racism as well as sexism. So when we start to talk about HIV, can you dig into a little bit on that racism piece? Because racism has been such a, not that it hadn't been a conversation for the past 400 years, but here we've seen the conversation be a lot more bold and in our face and the faces of others. So why is racism a factor, or even sexism a factor when it comes to HIV?
I think that, again, from just a South perspective and being able to understand structural racism, coming out of Jim Crow, understanding how redlining plays effect in terms of how we as Black people access healthcare, and even thinking about how doctors and providers talk to us, even though they may be Black, still they've been trained a certain way. And so they have unconscious bias as well as conscious bias, deliberately bias in terms of how they engage us in care. And so understanding that HIV is, someone can acquire HIV through sexual activity, along with sharing needles, things of that nature, which we shun individuals who have substance use disorders, and people who have sex and have good quality sex consistently, sometimes in certain arenas, they're thought about being promiscuous. And so you can have someone, it only takes you one opportunity from a sexual aspect, as well as sharing needles, to be able to acquire HIV. Automatically, when someone gets diagnosed, it's automatically thought of that person, particularly if it's a female, that they were sleeping around or that they were doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. So I think that we have to acknowledge that and then be able to build out from that as it relates to, again, being to look upon sex from a positive perspective. There's a new term over the past couple of years where it talks about sex positivity. And so as Black women, we are subjected in rap music, movies about our sexuality or our sex or our sexualness, right? But a lot of times we don't get a chance to really embrace that from a positive perspective, that it's more so from an objective, we're being objectified. So what you have is that we don't do a good job being able to have those intimate conversations with our sexual partners and being able to say, well, I'm concerned. I want to make sure that that you're looking out for my best interest, and I'm looking out for your best interest around when we decide not to use a condom, or when we do use a condom and the condom slides off or it breaks in the middle of the activity. All of that, to me, again, from the oppressive perspective. And when I have white female friends and they talk about sex different than how I talk about it. Well, before I started doing what I do now, I talk about it just like they talk about it, but from a very ethnic and cultural perspective, I think that we have to be honest with ourselves and even think about how we were raised as young women, how our moms and aunties and grandmoms talked to us about sex. It wasn't as open.
Yes.
And so understanding all of that has a part as it relates to how anyone, man or woman, but just from a Black female perspective, how we can acquire HIV, and it's in our community. So over those stats and being able to, if we were all on the moon and we're having sex, unprotected sex, not using a condom consistently correctly, we wouldn't have HIV. So HIV, unfortunately, is in our community. And that's also due to some of the oppressive policies that have been put in place.
Yes. We have a question. I'm going to ask you, Ms. Rucker, to speak on that. Being a young woman, do you feel that coming of age, and you're at an age where HIV has been a part of your entire life, right? So it's been here your entire life. Do you honestly feel like you were prepared to know about the risk of HIV? School, family, were you prepared?
I definitely think I was not, because really growing up, the thing you hear about the most is STDs. I didn't really know anything about HIV until I got into my career field older. I would say later in high school. But you know, in middle school, they teach us about STDs and things like that. But HIV is something way different, and it's hard to really know, for people to know. It's not really incorporated into our school system. So where do you learn about these things until you get into your career field? And
Absolutely. Which is why these conversations are so valuable. And I want to encourage people, if you have not, please use the Q&A, ask us questions. We want to answer those questions. We have a question that came up. Before we answer that, Ms. Rymsky, were you prepared? Do you feel like you were prepared as an African-American woman? Did anybody have the conversations with you?
No, I don't think, you know, of course I wasn't prepared as a young woman, as a teenager. That wasn't the conversation in my home, because, you know, I grew up in a single mother home, where my mother had to work a lot. So that wasn't something that she was so focused on, is trying to educate me and my sister, even my brothers, about, you know, our sexuality and having those conversations about sex and having safe sex. And so that was never a conversation that was never told, even not even in high school. You know, I didn't experience sex education in middle school or high school. And then when I got to college, of course, I took, you know, we had to take the physical education, but it wasn't much talked about, and HIV wasn't the conversation. So no, I wasn't prepared for it.
Gotcha. So we had a question that came up in the Q&A. Want to answer this. Is it true that sometimes for people who know they have HIV and take their medicine accordingly, cannot transmit the virus to their significant other or partner through unprotected sex? So Dr. O'Reilly, I'm going to throw that over to you.
So for individuals who are living with HIV, if they take their medication as prescribed every day, 99.9999%, 100% reduction in risk of getting it to someone else. So to answer that question, it is true. It's not just some, it's anybody who takes their medication. And what we say is that the virus has been, we say virologically suppressed, which just means that the medicine is preventing the virus from replicating. So those individuals, if they choose to not use a condom, particularly for women who are living with HIV, are able to have to get pregnant, and there's little concern for that male if they end up having physical intercourse. I guess I should say that.
Yeah, sexual intercourse.
Sexual
Let's call it what it is.
Sexual intercourse. That
vagina, the penis. We have
the penis. So the penis
conversation.
Yeah. So if she's taking her medicine, taking it every day, virus is suppressed, the male that she's having sex with will not get HIV. And in fact, we have a slogan now, which is you equals you, which means that if you are undetected, that is untransmittable, which just means that if, even though you're living with HIV, you go get an HIV test, that it's not going to show up as it relates in terms of that viral load. There are other ways that they can determine that you have the virus, but we know that by having someone who's on medication, they take the HIV test, it shows that they're virologically suppressed, that there's nearly 100% reduction in them, in the risk of them giving it to someone else.
Now, here's what I want to make sure that people understand. Undetectable does not mean cured.
Correct. We're not talking about cure.
We're not talking about cure. Yes, there's no cure.
But no cure for HIV. So
right.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
I don't want y'all to walk away saying, well, that lady said that if it's undetectable, then it's not. No. There is no cure for HIV. I give people the analogy of, you think about a bottle of water and you drink it all the way down, and it's just that little droplet of water. That's what HIV then looks like in the body. Just a little droplet. It's still there. You can still see it. It's still there, but just a little droplet. We've got questions rolling in. Great. So this question is for you, Dr. O'Reilly. Can you explain the difference in the conversation of sexuality in white women and Black women? This is a good one.
Yeah, so for me, again, this is, so I'm going to tell you about my white women. My white women are educated and they are professional women. And they talk about, oral sex, and they talk about it from a different perspective than Black women, than what I was comfortable, talking about. I didn't really have details about a tongue going in my butt and all of the different opportunities from a enjoyment perspective that they were sharing with me. And it was done it wasn't done in a shameful manner, I guess I should say. In addition to that, being able to talk about anal sex as part of just regular position when it comes to sex. I think that, now you may have more Black women, again, due to rap music and this rap music along with I want to say social pornography. There is they call it Twitter After Dark, that has allowed possibly more Black women to be able to participate in that. I think that it's really interesting because what I see too is, even with my son, I have a 19-year-old son, and his interaction with white girls are different than his interaction with Black girls. And so what you have is a more of a pronunciation of sexuality. And what I mean about sexuality is that white girls are more talkative around what they're willing to do to my son. And then while Black girls will talk about it, but it's still in a more conservative manner than what than what my son is accustomed to. And so he shares with me how he has to basically push pussy away. And I mean, but we're all adult, we're all women, but that's what he says.
Dr. Riley, don't have the Deltas not invite me back.
I'm sorry, but I just wanted to keep it real. So
but I want to bring in Ms. Rucker, because we're talking about this multi-generational, right? We're talking about young women. So my question to you, Ms. Rucker, is, are you all now able to have these more open conversations, or is there still stigma around conversations, I'll say, in the 20-something-year-old group? Can you all have these open conversations?
I think we can, and we can't at the same time, because among each other, we are who we are. We're comfortable with each other, but a lot of the conversations have to happen outside of just our group. And that affects, how we're able to talk to our doctors, talk to our parents, able to get the testing that we need every 3 months in between partners when we're supposed to. And it's hard to tell your doctor, what you're doing, because you don't want her or him to be like,
what you doing? You doing that? Yes.
We're so young, supposed to be 18 to 25, 26 years old. So we're scared of judgment while still trying to live our life at the same time.
Let me just say that's that bias that Dr. O'Reilly brought in earlier. That change when you get older. There's still a lot of us who cannot have an open, honest conversation with our provider, because the question will be, oh, you're married, or you've been in a stable relationship for a long time, or this or that. So that doesn't get any easier. So really that empowerment to have that conversation, it really starts with you. So you have to be comfortable enough to say, hey, I'm the real MVP here, right? I need to make sure that I'm being taken care of. Now, going into that, I want to respond, but I'm going to ask you this question, Ms. Rymsky. Knowing that many of us were not prepared, how do we normalize the conversation across this multi-generational community? So how do we normalize, even now here with us now on this platform, I'm sure we have young ladies as young as 18 to potentially up to 80. So how do we normalize this conversation multi-generationally?
Well, the way I look at it, and getting more women engaged in the conversation is having that real hardcore talk around sexual health, and providing a safe place for women to talk about that. Like Ms. Rucker was saying, as a young woman, providing a safe place so that we can talk about what sex look like, and what we want in sex and how we want that sex to look. And so just being able to have that conversation and being able to be free to have that conversation, I think that's the way that we'll be able to normalize it.
Okay, gotcha. Now I have another question here. I want to make sure that we're answering the questions, but can an HIV positive woman give birth to an HIV positive baby or give birth to a baby without them having HIV? So Dr. Riley, I see you've already answered it, but let's answer that live.
Yeah, so a couple of things that can happen. First and foremost, all women who are pregnant before they give birth should get an HIV test. It should happen throughout their pregnancy as well as at delivery. Yes. And so for those individuals that they know, because there's two scenarios here. I see that I have a little delay, but hopefully you guys can hear me. So for those individuals who know that they're living with HIV and they become pregnant, they get on medication, and like that whole thing that I talked about, U equals U, that's even dealing with a mother to child. And in fact, we were able to identify that years ago because we had women who weren't pregnant. They became pregnant, but they were taking their HIV medication. They gave birth, and the baby ended up not acquiring the virus. So that really gave the foundation for them to do additional research and being able to look at men who have sex with men, if they got on medication, how that they would not give HIV to someone else. So first and foremost, being able to appreciate a female who knows she has HIV before she becomes pregnant, she takes her medicine, she will not have a baby. As long as she takes her medicine, becomes biologically suppressed, she will not have a baby who ends up getting HIV from her. Yeah. The second aspect of it is if female has not been in care, hasn't had an HIV test. A lot of times let me just make this point. So for that particular situation, she shows up at the ER. At that moment, she's in delivery, 9 centimeters. They're trying to figure out if she's going to have vaginal or cesarean or C-section. They will do an HIV test. Hopefully it's a rapid test, which means that they will get the results within 20 to 30 minutes. At that moment, what they will do, and she's not been on any medicine, they will actually start giving her medicine at that moment. The baby will be delivered, and then they will begin to give the baby medicine. And in that particular situation too, there's a 95% chance that that baby will also not get HIV. So there's 2 ways in which a mother who's living with HIV has an opportunity to give birth to a child and that baby not end up with HIV.
Yes.
The first part is what we really, really want, because that way we can monitor the mother, making sure that she has enough of the medication in her system well in advance before she actually has delivery. But if by chance it doesn't happen, she comes into the emergency room or wherever she is and able to start that medicine on her then, but also being able to give it to the baby once the baby is born. The baby will not, what we say is seroconvert, which means that the baby will not end up acquiring the virus.
Yeah, we've actually done really good with that here in the state of Mississippi. We've done really, really, really good with that. And if you know a woman who's pregnant, you know that she got tested when she first went to her very first appointment, and she's going to get tested right before delivery. And that is to ensure that babies are not born with HIV. So we've done phenomenal when it comes to babies being born with HIV here in this state. These questions are rolling in. I'm so excited about it. Next question is, what are your thoughts? And this is to everyone, but what are your thoughts about the amount of energy given by the federal government on issues relating to the opiate epidemic or addiction compared to HIV/AIDS research, even with the crack epidemic? How things have that's been a issue for me. I'll just be honest with you all, because I do know the government has invested vast amounts of money around the opiate issues, or the issues around persons who have an opiate addiction, whereas we were criminalized, meaning African Americans, poor African Americans were criminalized if they were a person who used drugs, whether it was crack, cocaine, whatever, mainly crack. We were criminalized for it. So what are our thoughts around that? And I'll add another one in there. When we look at the response around COVID, right? When we look at the response, there's been a huge response. why haven't we had that same type of response around HIV? And considering even the drug users, what's going on with that? Why haven't we done that? Want to start with you, Ms. Rymsky? What do you think? Why haven't we done that?
Well, if I had to be honest about this thing,
I'm gonna be honest, Ms. Rymsky.
The way I feel about this opiate and drug use stuff, and if people getting paid off of it, it makes sense to them. But if they're not getting paid off of people living with HIV, if it's nothing that's going to benefit them, it's not going to be a big issue for them. And that's the way I look at it today.
Okay. Any thoughts on that, Ms. Rucker? Why do you
agree? I definitely agree with them getting paid off of it. You see the same thing with marijuana, we selling it, they can't get no money off of it, we going to jail. Yeah, and just like the opioid thing, and it affects whites more. So there's more racism again. So there's more energy towards that. Since it's us, it's not a big deal.
Let's just call a thing. Yes, systematic racism. Let's just call a thing a thing. This is when Dr. O'Reilly brought up racism earlier. This is what it looks like, right? That is what systematic racism looks like in healthcare. Because if we say one group, oh, it's affecting, whites, right? So they need help. They need assistance. And I'll just tell you, the state of Mississippi got millions of dollars around the opioid crisis, millions of dollars. So that is what it looks like when we're starting to talk about this systematic racism that puts Black women at such high risk, right? That puts Black women at such high risk. I'm gonna move into a couple of these other questions. Can you get HIV from oral sex? Can you get HIV from oral sex? Dr. O'Reilly, can you get HIV from oral sex?
It's negligible. So being able to appreciate just how the HIV virus is transmitted, the CDC says that it's less than 0.0001% of the risk of someone acquiring HIV through oral sex. HPV is a different story, but HIV definitely.
But for the audience, we use HPV. We want to make sure they know.
Oh, HPV, human papilloma virus. So
yeah.
I feel like everybody knows what that is because everywhere I go to on college campuses, that's the main question I get is about human papilloma virus by HPV. Everybody want to know that because I guess, oral sex is in now. So.
And herpes.
Yeah.
Don't forget that. Herpes. You can certainly get herpes. Now we have another question here. How can we get real resources from doctors when, as African Americans, we don't feel comfortable talking about this topic with them? When we think when we think that they don't see our best interests at heart. So how do we get comfortable with having these conversations?
You asking me first?
Yeah, we can start with you, Dr.
So I'm going to tie this in, and again, I'm Black at the end of the day first, and then a woman second. And so being able to, one, acknowledge systemic racism, two, understanding what institutional racism is, along with systematic racism. You can't expect a system that is flawed, which means that they don't value as people. When you think about, as Black women on the call tonight, understanding that as a Black woman, when it comes to pregnancy, how many Black women are dying in childbirth, as well as the first year after they've given birth, that the healthcare system truly believes that Black women can handle pain far better, or far better than white women. And so when you look at those type of situations, the expectation is that you don't look for the healthcare system to just freely talk to you about offering you information about sexuality, or wanting to have those type of conversations from a proactive perspective. That word that you use is my favorite word, empowerment. It really comes down to, as a Black female, being able to first and foremost know your body, to be able to be your own advocate, And then 3, feel comfortable enough to where in any situation that you don't feel that you're really getting treated as the God-given, beautiful queen that God made you, to go somewhere else for care. I am solely for Black, pro-Black all day. So I seek out Black physicians. I seek out Black dentists. I even sought out a Black psychiatrist and psychologist for my son when he was diagnosed with ADHD. Because it's those things are too important. My body and my children are too important for me to educate you on what it is to be Black. So it's easy for me to go to a Black person who has those same frustrations that I have, the same passive aggressive experiences that I have, and being able to appreciate the trauma that racism has brought on to us as people, to where certain situations I respond differently. I don't like to wait. I struggle waiting. So for my doctor, he knows, okay, I got to get her in and out. Let me see what we can do in those conversations, because I work. I can't take off a half a day to sit up in your doctor's office. I can't do that. So how are we going to be able to see? I'm going to be your first or I'm going to be your last. But it's a conversation. And so I wanted to have those conversations with my physician so that he or she, and it's a he at this point, to be able to appreciate me as a patient and what I needed.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a couple of questions I'm going to answer, but I want to make sure I give Ms. Rymsky an opportunity, because as a woman living with HIV, I would love for you to be able to tell your story. I'm going to answer 2 questions that someone posed, and then Ms. Rymsky, I want you to tell us a little bit about your experience. One question is, what is an appropriate age to start discussing HIV? The truth of the matter is you know your child, and you know what your child is being exposed to. So if your child is coming home and if they're asking you questions, answer the questions. And let's get out of this. Part of the stigma around sex and HIV is we're using words like the tallywhacker and your pocketbook and all of those. Be honest with your child. Be honest with your son. Be honest with your daughter. That is your vagina, right? Because this is what's we ask about how do we have these conversations with a doctor. And some women are 50 years old still calling their vagina their pocketbook, right? So if you want a private part, fine, but vagina, proper terminology, right? You know your kid, and I can't say, well, you wait until they're 12, because they may got exposed to everything by 12. But monitor your child, know what they're seeing, know what they're being exposed to. And if they're asking you questions, just be honest and answer the questions. Because here's the thing, you want them to get the information from you. And if you don't know the answer, find somebody that does. Be okay with finding someone that knows the answer, because you want your child to be armed with the proper information. When they get ready to go back to school, you get them school supplies, right? They give you that whole list. And you go, because you want your child to be successful in school. We want them to be successful when it comes to these relationships, right? And I ask parents, what would you rather a child come home and tell you? Hey, I had sex, but I was safe. I used the condom. I was this. Or would you rather them come home and tell you they got HIV? Because no one told them anything. No one answered their questions. So that's the decision that you make with your own child. The next question is, how can you bring this conversation to your significant other about wanting to be tested together or be aware of HIV, et cetera? We all want to have children, but definitely want to know if your partner is HIV free. Here's the truth of the matter, and this is what I tell young ladies that I mentor. The earlier the conversation, the better. You know, guys have no issue talking about sex in the first time they meet you. They don't mind telling you what all they want to do to you. And hey, if you want to do that, girl, go right on ahead. But tell him, if you want to do all these things, see, what I require is that we go to this clinic together. Not you go get your results. Now let's go together. Let's find out where we are together. I want to make sure you're safe. I want to make sure that I'm safe. The earlier the conversation starts, the better, right? So don't wait until y'all done got to a point and now you in love with him, and now you're like, oh Lord, how do I? Now ask him, well, it doesn't matter if he walk away or not. Emotionally, if it doesn't matter, that's when you ask. That's when you bring the conversation up. You bring the conversation up early on. Let him know that that's one of your parameters. That's one of your standards. That we go and get tested. We make sure we good. We make sure we straight. And that way we move forward and then set parameters around it, right? Okay, we're gonna go every 3 months, we're gonna go every 6 months, just making sure that everybody is good. Set some parameters around that. I know we're quickly approaching time. That hour has passed so quickly. But Ms. Rymsky, I wanted you to take a moment as an African-American woman living with HIV here in the state of Mississippi. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and your experience?
Well, yes, I can. In the year of 2016, I was actually diagnosed with HIV. Prior to being diagnosed with HIV, I actually had a surgery that I had to be done for sinuses, and the doctor ended up doing the surgery, come back, said, hey, I noticed that something was going on and I had to fix it. Have you ever been tested for HIV? Immediately after that, I knew I had a yearly checkup coming up because I do a yearly checkup every year faithfully. And I always get tested for STDs and STIs because I knew I was a woman in relationship and I was having sex. Well, after that, I actually went to my yearly checkup, saw the doctor. The doctor asked the question, do you want to be tested for HIV? And because I had already heard before, I said, yeah, sure, that'll be great. Okay, after that, I got tested. Well, when I come back to the clinical appointment, probably 3 weeks later, that's when he told me that I was HIV positive. And at that moment, of course, it was a shock for me because I didn't think that I could ever get HIV. The stigma among women, getting HIV is pretty much among sex workers, women that is promiscuous in relationships. But I knew I wasn't that woman. I was a church-going woman, loved the Lord, and I just wanted to be in a good love relationship with somebody. And I ended up with the wrong somebody. And so from there, I went on into getting more information about HIV, and I actually became my own advocate because of the experiences I was having with doctors. And I knew from there that I wanted to educate other women about this because this is something that is major. And as I realized that, the numbers were high among Black women, I realized that, the narrative had to be changed. It wasn't just, sex workers or women that is promiscuous, but I met women that are married women that got HIV, women that were born with HIV, and also pregnant women that acquired HIV. And so this road for me has been very enlightening, and also to be able to educate and empower women through my testimony. And so, I tell people all the time, it's not just drug users, it's not just gay men, it's not just sex workers that are acquiring HIV, but it's everyday 9 to 5 people that's trying to raise their children and take care of their families. And so, yeah, that's my story. And I hope that it encourages somebody.
Ms. Rymsky, thank you so much for sharing that.
Dr.
Value, go ahead.
Dr. Monger, it's us sisters on the Zoom. And so, Rymsky, I love what you just said. And I just have a question. Why was he the wrong person? You used the word, you just ended up with the wrong person. Was he wrong because he had HIV? Was he wrong because he didn't share it? Was he wrong because he didn't know he had it? Like, what do you mean by the wrong person? I just want to be able to appreciate that.
He was wrong because he knew that he had it and he didn't, share that with me. And that's what made it all wrong.
Mm-hmm. So he took the choice from you.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. So that I think that's so valuable. I think that's a perfect way to as we prepare to close, is that we have to be women, sisters. You got to be the real MVP for your own healthcare, right? You got to be the MVP. You got to see this as that. When Ms. Rymsky is a prime example of, this whole belief that it's this woman and that woman. I joke when I'm doing presentations about, tell physicians all the time, I said, ask your client, because no matter how long the skirt is, it comes up. That's number one. And number two, we're human beings. Sex, we all got here because someone decided to have sex, right? You wouldn't be here, right? Unless you were a person that there was something done biologically to get you here. But otherwise, sex had to happen for us to get here. So it is a natural part of the life and world we live in. So we got to take the mask off and have the conversation around HIV and our risk for HIV. I mean, sisters, the SOS is we got to save our sisters. We have to save our sisters. We have to be the rescuers for ourselves. We can't look for someone else to come in and rescue us and make sure that we're safe and taken care of. The response around COVID in the state of Mississippi only got better when Black public health leaders stood up and said, we will not be ignored as it relates to this virus, this illness. We will not be ignored. And I will tell you, the same way that Delta has stood on the front lines of so many other global issues around social justice, HIV is now a social justice issue. It is a social justice issue. So we got to sound the SOS to save our own selves, to save our sisters. So thank you all. We got a couple of more questions. I'm gonna try and get at least one or two in. Okay, Kesha, you were already answering those. Great.
Yeah, I'm trying my best. This is so good. I know we're going over, but so just to kind of help about the, back in the day, we would say, oh, the virus lays dormant in my body for so and so time. So the virus, so when we have HIV virus, just like COVID virus, it is replicating all the time, but there are some parts of it that doesn't. So even with someone who has HIV, you have parts of the virus that is replicating and parts of the virus, or some of the viruses lying dormant. The key here is that back in the day, we did not have very sensitive tests to be able to pick up the virus. Now we do. So someone who, depending upon how well or how healthy their immune system is, we have tests now that can really within 10 to 14 days figure out if someone has HIV, if they've been if they have had sex or shared a needle with someone who's living with HIV. Yeah. The worst case scenario, within a good 90 days, it can be detected. What happens is that depending upon when that person had sex, along with, I want to be professional in terms of ejaculation, how much ejaculation, what parts of the body was being used, if it was from a penis to a vagina or a penis to an anus and, the butt and all that good stuff. So just be able to appreciate that it doesn't lay dormant consistently years and years and years. That's not the case. So it ends up being at what point someone gets a test, at what point their body's able to acquire or develop antibodies to be able to pick that. The test is used, one of the tests is used to determine if someone has HIV from antibodies in terms of that the body's immune system responding to the infection, but also the test that we now use is being able to detect the virus itself, which is what we call the viral load.
Yeah, I want to also make a mention too, when we start to talk about anal sex, I know a lot of younger women are starting to engage in anal sex because they don't want to worry about pregnancy. But I will tell you, anal sex is actually the highest risk for HIV transmission and acquiring HIV. So if you are engaging in anal sex, no judgment here. Just make sure you know that there is very, very high risk for acquiring HIV through anal sex. Thus, knowing the status of yourself and your partner are vital, right? Absolutely 100% vital. Just want to make sure that tonight, in conversations like this, that we're sounding the alarm. The forgotten few African-American women who are acquiring HIV, highest case rates among women globally are Black women. Highest case rates globally, right? Same way here in Mississippi. When we start to talk about rates of HIV in women, it is African-American women. We got to sound the SOS sisters. We got to save ourselves. We got to make sure that we are talking and having open and honest conversations. At this point, so we got 10 more minutes that we can discuss. Yes, ma'am. That came from Madam President. Yes, ma'am. Where is science in terms of cure for HIV/AIDS? Dr. O'Reilly, I'm gonna put that on you. Where are we around cure?
Yeah, actually, the company I work for, we are working on the cure for HIV. And so I will tell you, it's not going to happen in the next 3 years. We're hoping possibly the next 10. The reason for that is that, as I mentioned to you, that the virus doesn't replicate all the time. And so the medication that we have on the market only works on the viruses that are replicating. So the virus that's laying dormant or not replicating, the medication is not working on them. And so what we're having to do is try to figure out, how do you wake up the virus? How do you make the virus start to replicate? So there are drugs in the pipeline, or drugs that we're working on to be able to kind of come up with a best case solution for it. There's also research in terms of a vaccine, which means that you get a vaccine to prevent someone from acquiring HIV. Did my thing just go out? Can you guys still hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
We can still hear you. Yeah.
But anyway, so there's no cure anytime soon. We're hoping probably within the next 10 to 15 years.
Okay. So the next question that came up is, and I'll put this over to you, Ms. Rucker. Do you feel like the reason that people see it as a issue around gays, or that they're the lead spreaders, do you think it's due to the fact that anal sex is the easiest way to transmit? You think that's why?
I do think it has a lot to do with it, because even from the jump, it was known as it was branded as a gay disease, and we just can't get away from that, even though we all have booty holes, we all have them. So I don't understand,
and a bunch of people use them.
A lot of people are using them, getting into using them, and just like you said, that's the easiest way to get it. So it did start off as a gay disease, how people wanted to make it. So now it's even worse.
I think making sure that the terminology we use, even in these forums, which is why we're so selective in the panel, is because we want to make sure that when you all walk away, that you're fully knowledgeable, right? Not just empowered, but that you're knowledgeable. And Ms. Rucker, thank you again for going back to the fact that the foundation of HIV was really around gay white men. I mean, I'll be honest with you, even World AIDS Day was really because there were so many young gay white males dying of AIDS. So it became a way to memorialize them, right? But in order for us to really get a handle, we haven't talked much about this, but I want to make sure we bring this in, since we got a few more minutes. I'm gonna shoot this to you, Ms. Rymsky, because you brought this up as you were talking to us about who you are and your experience. But what role does the church play, or has the church not played, when it comes to addressing this issue in the African-American community? Because we know the church is full of Black women, right? That front row pews. So what role has the church played or not played in this?
Well, of course, I feel like, of course, being in the church, that the church does play a big role in this, because the church is considered a safe place. When we talk about God and Jesus and what he was all about, love and saving people and delivering and healing people, the church was the core for this, the place where people should be able to come. As they say, the place for the sick, when Jesus said, I come for the sick, not the well. And so that's why I feel like the church is the major part of this, and should be more involved in the conversation about HIV and AIDS. And it's real funny to me, because I had a conversation with a pastor here about 3 weeks ago, and I asked him, I said, what do you think that is keeping faith-based organizations from getting more involved in the conversation? And he looked me in my eyes and said, Rymsky, I'm gonna be honest with you. It's all about, gay men. And I said, well, what it's gonna take for that to change? And he basically told me, you're going to have to just strike the conversation. What do a HIV victim look like? And so when we think about it, because of the Bible and what it says about homosexuality, we don't want to touch it because that's what we relate it to, just homosexuality. But the reality is that everybody is being affected with HIV, not just homosexual men in that sense, but it's Black women, it's white women, it's children, it's families being affected. So, you know, the church has to play a big role, and it's important for them to be a part of this conversation.
I think we have to be mindful too, because I think, and before I even say this, just know I am an extreme believer. You know, I know from whence my help comes, as the old folks say. But I have to say this, that many women, we talked very early on about how gender is a determinant for HIV among Black women. Oftentimes in the church, we're not always taught to have a voice, which means that for many of us, attempting to even have a conversation with our husband, with whom is the head of the household, about things that he may be doing or be doing, stepping out, you know, he gone on Friday night till 2 a.m. and the next Friday night he gone till 2 a.m. We're not often given a voice, right? We're not told that we can have a voice to talk about our bodies, right? And our risk of acquiring a disease. And we have to modify that narrative to know that in order to take care of ourselves, we got to have a voice. You got to be able to have a conversation, even if your partner is your husband. As Ms. Rymsky said earlier, I've encountered many women who acquired HIV from their husbands. And I'm not talking about women who were married a year. I'm talking about women who had been in 10, 15, 20-year marriages, who had never slept with another man outside of her husband, and comes into the clinic and finds out that she's HIV positive, right? Devastating. So I want to make sure that as women, that we are open and honest with who our partners are. We're open and honest about who we are, right? It ain't always the guy stepping out. Sometimes we decide to step out too, right? And if we know that that's what we're doing, then let's make sure we're protecting ourselves, whether it's at home or outside of the home. Let's make sure that we're protecting ourselves. Again, I want to say thank you all. That 10 flew by so quickly. I want to say thank you all for joining us tonight for this robust conversation. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed facilitating this conversation with this dynamic panel of young women. We wanted it to be multi-generational. We wanted it to be reflective of community as well as science. And I'm so excited to say, I think we did that tonight. I think we accomplished that goal of ensuring that no matter where you fell in the spectrum of being a Black woman, that you heard or saw a bit of yourself in tonight. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to the ladies of Delta Sigma Theta, and you all take it from there. You're on mute, Mr. There you go.
There you go. Woo, I was saying, wow, this was phenomenal. I first want to say thank you. This information, if you didn't know, we know now, and we want to say thank you. Dr. Monger, thank you. To the panelists, our very own Delta Pi, Amani Rucker, thank you. Dr. Kesha O'Reilly, thank you. Rymsky Evans, thank you. I am so proud. Thank you. I want to take this opportunity to recognize President Gwendolyn Handy. I want to thank First Vice Nikisha Davis for bringing such a warm welcome. Again, Dr. Monger, thank you. Also, we want to thank our collaborating, the men of AIA Epsilon Lambda chapter. Thank you, Delta Pi. thank you. I want to say thank you one more time, because guess what? We all know that you are doing a great work informing us of HIV and AIDS, and we know that you are fighting a good fight to keep us in the know of what's going on. Finally, thank you, J-Mac, and the entire IAI committee. This could not be done with you all. Please tune in tomorrow, which is Thursday, December 2nd at 6:00 p.m. We have another conversation on HIV and AIDS on this Sunday, December 5th at 4:30. We're going to meet at the Capitol for a candlelight visual. Everybody's invited, the Divine Nine, the beautiful community. We're going to have a visual for everyone that played a part in HIV and AIDS. We want to see you there. 400 High Street, State Capitol, 4:30. And last but not least, on behalf of the Jackson, Mississippi Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, we want to say thank you. This could not be done without you all. Thank you. You all remain blessed, and let's keep up the good fight for HIV and AIDS. You all have a beautiful night.